So this topic is an article that was given by Sri Raghavan Iyer, and I will be giving a summary and referring back to the article many times. And so if anything in here kind of speaks to you, I would really recommend to go and read the article. You can find it on theosophytrust.org. "120 years have passed since the beginning of the Aquarian Age in 1902, and humanity has already witnessed a drastic shift on the physical plane, the mental plane, and within the collective atmosphere. We are more connected globally. We have access to a wealth of information. Technology has enabled us to fly from one end of the world to the other in a matter of hours. We can speak or write to others from different countries and traditions in a matter of seconds. Although many of these advances are quite uplifting, they have brought on a slew of conflicts in their wake. Like all beginnings, it is necessary for the old to die out and transform into something greater. This transformation can be painful, just like anyone who has successfully passed from adolescence to adulthood can surely empathize. There is no doubt that the world has changed. Many individuals feel that we are living in a time of transition, of disintegration of the past modalities, ways of thinking and living. Most human beings can sense in myriad ways that we as humanity are on the precipice of a great change. This may mean many things to many different people throughout the world. Some are apt to fall into fear, despair and hopelessness, anger and victimhood. Many people are collapsing. There is a massive karmic readjustment occurring, a sorting out and a shifting of past Piscean modalities into a brighter Aquarian future. It is a thoughtful and relevant exercise to ask questions of what this means for humanity. What does it mean to shift from the Piscean age into the Aquarian? What is Aquarian? How does this differ from the Piscean? What is therapy? Is there a need for therapy? If therapy is needed, what is Aquarian therapy? Is this simply sitting down in front of a psychologist and sorting out why one is living a life of quiet desperation? What does this mean for the world and for oneself as an immortal monad, having a seemingly strange existence in a body with other human beings, also capable of speaking, thinking, and acting with as real of a life as our life is for ourselves? The author of Aquarian Therapy frequently points towards acknowledging our own ignorance by calmly and humbly admitting, I do not know. And going even further by acknowledging that one also does not know what is unfolding in the Aquarian age. Even though we do not know, we can seek to know. When we could admit we do not know the answers to all these questions, strangely, our mind can become untethered from rigid and limiting mental structures and enter into the realm behind and beyond the known. It frees us from the past. He says in regard to the Aquarian age, once and for all people will have to go behind and beyond labels, externals, forms, names, claims, and containers of all kinds. They will have to discover the life-giving stream of wisdom that becomes a self-sustaining current, fertilizing the soil of the mind and giving birth to creative ideas and beneficent impulses. They will have to learn to direct power to act in new ways with willing cooperation in a context larger than themselves, and on behalf of a vision that is only dimly sensed. Mohandas Gandhi famously said, "Be the change you wish to see in the world." This statement beautifully intimates this Aquarian philosophy and the Hermetic axiom of within, without, above, below. Aquarius, the water bearer, is the symbol of the universal man, pouring forth the waters of wisdom from the heavens to a thirsty humanity. Aquarius is the symbol for humanity, true individuality within the group, or the perfected, undivided duality of the higher self with the universal self of all. The author points to the old Egyptian symbol of Aquarius, which depicted Aquarius as a serpent coiled in a spiral around a jar containing liquid fire. This image has reference to those who can tap the highest sources of primordial energy in invisible nature and channel it, bring it down and apply it. As in the restoration of sap in a piece of desiccated wood by applying resin from a pine tree. They are able to do as much revitalizing as is allowed by forms that are, alas, nearly dead. These symbols draw us towards something profoundly deep and innate in our being. Can these archetypes help us to intuit what the Aquarian age is about and what kind of therapy we can administer to ourselves? If we recognize that our world is changing, past modalities disintegrating, how can we aid in this transformation and insert ourselves within this magnetic healing current? The author draws us to dwell upon the universal by stating that the great teachers of Gupta Vidya hint that the noumenon of the three-in-one, the invisible, the inmost invisible triad in every human being, and the source of all thought, will, and feeling, itself has an invisible central point in Akasha, the noumenon, which is the very essence of spiritual fire. He then draws us towards the therapeutic use of manas. Such a person does not need to make claims to know, but can get excited about a great idea and can incarnate it by continually dwelling upon it. The idea of aspiration, the idea of harmony, the idea of solidarity in its deepest sense, any of the ideas that are the living germs of Aquarian therapeutics can be put to use and made to light a fire. By intensely dwelling upon such an idea, a person can actually ignite a small spark, which will be sustained by regular return to the thought, looking at it in different ways, without becoming entranced by any false crystallization or rigid formulation. Through returning again and again to the main idea, a person can, in time, light up a radiant center in the human constitution, which may serve as a hooking point from which the person can go deeper and come closer to the noumenal. Now, one cannot do this without lighting up the spiritual will, which has to do with true self-esteem, moral firmness, continuity of consciousness. In the beginning, the author states that human beings may seek authentic confidence in their own divine destiny, out of pain through experience, by sifting, by meditation, by mistakes and learning from them. And in time, they can therapeutically release within themselves that mental breath and spiritual fire, where they always feel benevolent towards all, but where that benevolence is backed by depth of thought, directed by a precise, luminous intelligence. True self-confidence can only be sparked by acting for something greater and beyond the personal self, and insert oneself into a greater whole. It is extremely important to nourish compassion and focus the power of manas through the heart. If we do not nourish the heart, these profound ideas are simply empty words and without any living power in our lives. How can we hope to activate the spiritual will without true self-esteem? The ideal mode of doing this is given in the article is through devotion. The author says that in the Aquarian age, the mental fire of devotion and sacrifice means purgation, and no substitute will serve. If a person can light up that deep devotion and focus it in one direction, serving one's Ishtaguru or chosen teacher, and can totally concentrate with undivided, unbroken, uninterrupted love, loyalty, and obedience, there is then the absolute assurance of fanning the flame in the heart. However dark the world appears to be, however heavy one's suffering seems, however confusing the karma of the times, the secret flame ever strengthens itself. Ever reaching upward, it helps manas to salute the Atman and to become one-pointed in seeking the Atman without expectation. Then, as surely as there is a law of periodicity that cannot be confined to the trivial timetable of the ignorant personal self, which does not know the vaster cycles or the previous lives of its indwelling monad, or what is at the very core of its own being, invariably and infallibly, the strength of that impulse will prepare one for that perfectly right moment when the Atman through Buddhi can initiate and instruct. The Atma Buddhi is the Guru. It speaks to the soul as the inner voice of the daemon, the voice of the master, who is the invisible escort. That is the sovereign experience of true initiation. A constant flame, enabling one to come to ever higher levels of purification. The ceaseless self-purgation that is a prelude to total self-transformation can be lit from small beginnings. Such endeavors must be sifted, honed down to a fine authenticity, and not even whispered to a single living person. But at the same time, the line of life's meditation must not be forgotten by oneself. That is difficult. Maintained steadily and with continuity of consciousness, sincere efforts will lead from what, at one level, is the spark of simple devotion to an unknown object, to that deeper fire of inward devotion of the whole of one's sense of being in a manifested form, and then to the invisible prototype that is the Guru. This is signified by the higher line in the symbol of Aquarius. It is the vibration of universal consciousness, Mahabuddhi, which is always capable of being mirrored in the fleeting moment. It is also capable of dissolving the inverted and perverted image of itself formed in the waters of astral chaos out of conflicting feelings, ideas, and wills. These can all be displaced and transcended by the deathless vibration of supreme devotion in the indestructible heart. This is a profound statement and truly emblematic of authentic Aquarian therapy. In the voice of the silence, we are told that we must gain the power to slay our lunar form at will. In this article, we are given the alchemical method of doing so, not just for ourselves, but for the greater whole of mankind. This simple but awe-inspiring statement that we can transcend the inverted astral form of the shrunken self through sacrifice and nourishing supreme devotion gives a great hope for a brilliant and luminous future for mankind. This is also the same secret and kingly mystery given by Krishna to humanity as its guiding star, for the dark age of Kali Yuga. By linking up our own consciousness to the sacred lineage of great teachers, all the Buddhas, the Christs, the Krishnas, Mahatmas, and Bodhisattvas, through authentic devotion, we can truly emulate what was set down in the three fundamental propositions in the Gupta Vidya, or the secret doctrine, as well as the three aims of the Theosophical movement, given by Helena Petrovna Blavatsky and continued into the 20th century by the Magus teacher. This is our spiritual inheritance, the inheritance of every single immortal monad, currently in incarnation and also yet to be reborn. Although our future is surely to be bright, we must be patient with ourselves. William Quan Judge notably said, "Hold fast, go slow. There is need for calm." Because of the immense karmic precipitation going on in the collective consciousness, the alienation of the self is so pervasive in our society today. So many people are collapsing. Many people are falling prey to the mass psychosis incessantly given minute by minute on our television screens and in the media. We do not think for ourselves. If we do not think for ourselves, we can be sure that a hypnotic narrative will be provided for us. Disease, war, corruption, greed, and selfishness seem to rule in the world today. Our institutions, media, politicians, and leaders worldwide are riddled with corruption. A friend once told this student in regard to the coronavirus pandemic, "Death is the far enemy, fear is the near one." One only has to turn on the television to confirm this. But are the clever and obviously self-defeating narratives given in our media actually true? If we are to apply Aquarian therapy practically within our lives, surely this means retaining and using our own reasoning faculties. Aquarius, although metaphysically linked to fire and water, is actually an air sign, symbolizing the pure noetic use of manas. Simply put, this means thinking for oneself, practicing dianoia and thinking things through. A simple thought experiment that we can all try out is to void out all the conceptions we are bombarded with in the media and simply go out into the world and see for yourself if they're actually true in your daily life. Speak to people, connect with others in thought and feeling. Displace the confusion and fear just for a day, not just in the confines of one's own home on a meditation cushion, but out in the world. Are the narratives given in the media actually true? This student does not wish to mislead and state that horrors do not occur, but it is the stories we are told about the events, the lens we are told to look through and passively affirm that is simply untrue. If we take the third fundamental proposition to heart, that of universal unity with all beings, surely this means that the Hitlers, the Donald Trumps, and the Vladimir Putins of the world are also immortal souls. They are part of our family. And if evil exists in the world, it is because we are and continue to be fascinated by it. We continue to let it live in our consciousness. The divisions of state, country, politics, name, and form are simply false. There are simply just souls in different parts of the world. In the age of communication, the conflict is really on the mental plane, with the use of the mind and the creative faculties. Collectively, we are focusing our consciousness towards hate and fear every single time we believe the lopsided news and media, what they tell us to believe. This does not have to be so. As an exercise, next time you turn on that television and hear of the evil doings of Vladimir Putin, or the self-serving machinations of Donald Trump. Instead, you could choose to affirm the immortal monad within them. This is difficult, but doesn't this actually draw us closer to the sacred? The author states, wherever there is a terrible mutilation of the mind and a consequent anger, a crippling sense of self-alienation, there is the rush of the lemmings, as well as the desperate desire for a simple solution, a fervent wish to cop out altogether from their responsibilities. What is actually true is that we as human beings are responsible for our emanations, for every single thought and act. We can no longer look outwards for salvation, towards some political leader or even some spiritual being to save us. All of this is of the Piscean age. This way of thinking and operating is finished. The government didn't do anything to us. The Republicans and Democrats didn't do anything to us. The global elites didn't and aren't doing anything to us. We do it to ourselves internally. Power exists where we direct our consciousness. H.P. Blavatsky's Aquarian axiom in Gems from the East intimates the Aquarian modality. You cannot build a temple of truth by hammering dead stones. Its foundations must precipitate themselves like crystals from the solution of life. Every single effort to affirm the universal self of all uplifts everyone who may be struggling. And every passive response towards hatred drags the rest of our fellow human beings with. Even the simple act of taking a bath or making the bed with a pure mind and a calm, careful attention is extremely purifying and can help to release the will towards the good. In this way, every single effort has meaning, and every small beginning is immensely important. It is literally drop by drop that the ocean may be purified through individual effort within your life. Every single moment is a moment of choice. Despite the current state of affairs, there are awakened masses all over the globe. Individuals who choose to turn away from the lunar noise, people who are becoming more self-reliant within a smaller community, who do not buy into the mass hysteria and seek to live in a more harmonious life than what is presented to us. The souls coming into the world will simply not swallow the nonsense anymore. Already the false nature of our society from the last 3 decades of blatant corruption and misleading of the public for the sake of war and profit is steadily unraveling. The pandemic has heightened this unraveling even further, and there are less and less people who believe in the old ways of doing things. It cannot sustain itself. The author affirms this by stating that all this corruption of consciousness is coming to an end. He says, why is such self-destructive manipulation doomed to disappear? The reason is that one cannot take an immortal soul that has journeyed much longer than is dreamt of by the boldest genealogists of the age of man and expect such a being to swallow the rubbish of reductionism of every sort. The garbage festers, but humanity is too old to be forever victimized by tiny coteries of nihilists. Human beings need ideas large enough to accommodate their sense of readiness for the future. This means that the only way to overcome self-alienation is by attunement to the universal mind, through the contemplation of universal ideas. Because the personal mind has become flaccid, especially when it considers noble ideas enshrined in the platitudes of the past, it is liable to cling to mere externals. It must penetrate behind the visible forms to the formless ideas. It is then meaningful to say, I do not know, because each idea presupposes a larger idea, which is in turn ontologically presupposes one which is still more profound. There is an expanding transcendence of existing conceptions of space, time, motion, and identity. The more one realizes this, the more genuine is the recognition that one does not know, and the greater the possibility of developing the desire to persist, to function freely within a realm of pure anti-entropic thought, which is completely potential. The mind is a great gift. Through purification by devotion, the mind can be brought to a calm balance and serve as an instrument of the higher self, capable of self-reproductive thought, like a fertile ground for the Buddhic release of beneficent and healing vibrations. This requires discipline, practice, and a broader and unlimited perspective of the self, the world, and what humanity is capable of. We have to really want to know and hunger for knowledge to awaken the noetic. But we have to want to know out of a deep devotion to the larger whole, for the sake of the good. Even if we do not know what the larger good is, we are asked to think about it, to keep thinking of the good of others and the good of all, while negating any concern for oneself in the future. He explains the ultimate paradox. When one has totally forgotten any concern for one's own future, then one's true purpose as a soul, one's deeper destiny, will speak as the voice of the spiritual heart. But only when the mask of the personal self is seen for what it is and stripped away layer by layer, no matter how painful this self-crucifixion is. The author also gives a practical and difficult test. Individuals must be willing to test themselves out of self-respect by prescribing their own daily discipline to follow for a week. But they have to keep trying week by week, testing themselves. Can I take one thought and can I maintain it as a vibration in my mind and heart for a week? This is a strain. It will not immediately be possible. The worst will be that one will not even know that one is forgotten. But giving oneself a chance, week after week, a point comes where one must succeed. There can be no respect for oneself. If it cannot be cultivated when one's faculties are relatively healthy and when one has received so much from the teachings of the Mahatmas and the abundance of nature. The very thing that is difficult has to be attempted. This mental effort can so significantly change the ratios in the astral vehicle that the results can be seen on the physical plane to those who know. Every sincere seeker of truth that attempts this on behalf of the good of all will be recognized and receive unseen help. We cannot stop short. Persistence is key, not the result. By the very attempt, it will strengthen the spiritual will and nourish an authentic self-respect as a monastic being capable of true continuity of consciousness. This method of learning requires a total break from the past thought forms. Look not behind, or thou art lost, says the voice of the silence. The author ends by stating that the only way to enter into the fast-moving and invisible stream, which will become a mighty river in the future, is by becoming capable, through voluntary self-training, of activating the unmanifest potency of the universe, the liquid fire that springs from deep devotion to universal good, and by reaching out to the whole of the human race, including the unborn, who are always far more numerous than those who are presently incarnated. This is a formidable task, but any person by self-training in the art of using Aquarian axioms can enter the evolutionary stream, which will eventually produce minds as pellucid as crystal and hearts which are wisely benevolent, luminous with the intelligence of the universe. Aquarian therapy is really a call to action, a call to really think things through. And if one comes to recognize that they do not know, but they want to know, that they want to enter into a luminous and regenerative current for the sake of mankind and every creature throughout the world, then they must take responsibility, be patient with persistent courage and unshakable devotion to affirm the immortal monad and alchemize our entire being and sphere of focusing by focusing on the archetype of the universal good and the Aquarian man of the future. Not only can we heal ourselves, but we can heal and serve humanity.
Pardon me. Thank you very much, Michelle. That was such a perceptive elucidation of what is presented in the article. And it was very truly wonderful to hear you weave it into pertinent comments by HBB and wonderful warnings and encouragement by Judge. But also it was very, very helpful to us as students who always try to see things in terms ultimately of their implications for all of us as we go about in this world. As you say, it's a veil of tears, but nonetheless, our obligation, our deep obligation, is to somehow bring some light, some emanations, as you put it, the article puts it, that is somehow purifying, elevating. And even people, when they look at us, they should see something, feel something instantly of light, sunlight, optimism, without being foolish, without being naive. So you give us many good examples that are practical, but also at the attitudinal level too. What was good, because, and it reflects the article very accurately, is that you don't fudge it. You didn't fudge it when it comes to darkness. It's interesting because the voice speaks of the fact that at a certain point, when one is really suffering and one's feet is cut and one's bleeding, one is aware that immediately beyond, there's a magnificent plenum of being, which is full and pure, purifying and wholesome, and links us up, flows into all beings, all consciousness, from the atom to the adept. So that is very true. St. John of the Cross does the same thing. He talks about the dark night of the soul. And my heavens, when one reads what St. John of the Cross says, it is such a bleak condition of the soul. The one goes, good heavens, if you were in this condition, how could you ever possibly arise out of it, regenerated and refreshed? Because there's a thread when it's darkest, is when the light is unmanifest, is most potent. And when one has the power of devotion, everything else is set aside, personal ambitions are set aside, personal desires and expectations are set aside, they're all let go. Then the dawning comes. And with that supple dawn comes incredible awareness of the oceanic nature of oneself. And so I think you gave us all of that. And what you were doing, I think is very artful, the way you did it. And I'm very appreciative, and I'm sure others are too. So we can now invite questions that one might wish to direct to Michelle or leave to be discussed. See, silence is an answer.
Joe's got his hand up, so do I.
Oh, yes, sorry, Laura. Is that Laura and Joe?
You're supposed to go to the left first.
Yeah.
I think Judy was first, so let's hear from Judy first and then Joe.
Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, Judy, I see. I couldn't see her.
Really?
Yes, go ahead, Judy.
Me? Oh, all right. Thank you, Michelle, for a very beautiful talk on Aquarian therapy. Of late, I've been thinking about the darkness at midnight, just before I go to sleep. And the idea that the real sun in our galaxy is shining on our sun, or not a full hat that's acting like a mirror. And I find this a very peaceful and very therapeutic thought, rather like HPB's article where she talks about the flower that gave her love to the lone star at night, not the crass shining sun in the day that I used to like to lie out in the sun when I was a swimmer and a lifeguard. But I find the darkness not only peaceful, but I think it is divine. And I wonder if you could talk to us more about this. Is the darkness in some sense divine, because it really comes from a divine source when the sun is on the other side of the earth?
Well, I think Jim spoke about that briefly. It's, the idea of darkness can be scary for a lot of people, but when we can link it up to large ideas like pralaya, or a ceaseless disillusion, it's really this pure potential and freedom. Where one can be free of all these concepts and things that weigh us down. Jim, do you have anything else?
No, I think it's well put, because unlike the darkness and the shadows and the silhouettes, to go into the unmanifest in oneself is to go into a totally different you might say division of consciousness, and to tap something that is deeply spiritual. So this is a divine darkness that Judy is speaking of, and that people who can enter mentally into that divine darkness by, as they say in Hinduism, by going neti, by putting the mind on some vast cosmic idea, not knowing what it really is, but enjoying contemplating it, and then slowly sloughing off all the nuanced meanings that come and get our attention for a while, and then we recognize it must be deeper. We kind of go into we're more comfortable moving in the ocean of the unmanifest after a while, because we realize it's rich, as Michelle says, in potential. And potential here is not like latent or passive. When we enter into the potential, we are in a level of reality that is so much more wholesome and unifying and integrative of all the deeper feelings, and the sense of the expansiveness of the midnight sky. Like people in the desert, the hot sun is gone for the day, but when nighttime comes, it's not at all like being in a city. When you're out in the desert and you're looking up at the sky, the stars, which can seem so remote in a city, seem like they're right there. The entire heavens is a plenum of starlight, of constellations. And we sense as though we have a direct feeling with them, a direct connection with them. It's so marvelous. Sometimes people get this when they go to an observatory and watch some of the shows that they show on astronomy. You forget yourself entirely. You get so lost, loving in a good way. You get so absorbed. It's an echo of realization, because realization goes beyond everything. It's existentially assimilating the real. And as we assimilate the real and the unmanifest, and it becomes manifest, it has such a depth and a dignity and a richness and a sustaining ability that it's really quite remarkable. So the parallel of going into the darkness is a symbol of what Thoreau talked about before dawn, being able to get up early at night when it's just before morning. There's a suppleness And the mind is supple too. There's a freshness, a new beginning. The world has just begun. It's virginal, like a child discovering knowledge. To the child, as Payne remarks, to the learner, to the young child, to the young learner, the world has just begun. And every time it discovers knowledge, it's like a new discovery. The theorems have been rediscovered all over again by every young mind in the world. Every young enthusiast who studies something and really grasps it and understands it has taken what has been known for a long time and suddenly it becomes real, and therefore it's been born again. It's alive in another mind, another heart. To them, it is it's a Newtonian discovery. It's an Einsteinian world. It's ever fresh. It's ever new. Remember Ramanujan, the great South Indian mathematician, as his mentors, said, "My God, do you realize this man who had nothing but one simple textbook? In order to solve some of these remarkable, creative, strange theorems that he generated, to do the math of it, he had to rediscover the math of the last 300 years in order to approach the problem. He's wrong on certain details, but my heavens, what an original mind. What kind of genius is it that reinvents what took us 300 years to get to, and he does it in such an original way?" Well, that's rediscovering, tapping what is available to all and bringing it into incarnation. Now, I think, was it Joe or Laura who's next?
If you go by who's on the left, at least on my screen, it's Joe.
Thank you very much, Michelle. I think that Jim might have anticipated my brief question here. I was struck by that notion of the ultimate Aquarian paradox that the article points to, and I took it upon myself to post it there in the chat. You can see the short quote. "This is the ultimate Aquarian paradox. One does not really know what the larger good is, yet one is asked to think about it." And I just wondered, that is paradoxical to be invited or compelled to think about what one doesn't know. And I just wonder if you had more thoughts about that. Why is it therapeutic, and why might it be associated with Aquarius?
Any thoughts, Michelle?
Well, he did give several paradoxes in that article.
One paradox that comes at the end is that those who forget themselves will truly discover themselves. And maybe that has something to do with this as well. But it does seem, I mean, maybe with your comments about the Piscean age and the Aquarian age, to be compelled to think about what's out of reach. Apparently it's not out of reach to one part of us, but maybe to the personal mind, it still is out of reach. So it seems to imply we can send a feeler ahead of ourselves, so to speak.
Now, isn't now one of the cautions was interesting, and Michelle referenced it, and it's actually, you can understand why it's therapeutic, because when the article says, look, release yourself from the burden of thinking you know about the future. You don't need to know about what's going to happen tomorrow or what's going to happen the next century. And you don't have to claim to know what's unfolding in the Aquarian age. Don't give yourself that burden. That isn't necessary. But one of the portraits that is given of the Aquarian man or woman of the future, that we can contemplate, just like we contemplate all the various portraits of the sage that Krishna gives in the second chapter and later on. We can take this one particular portrait, which is what? He says that to the, excuse me, to the Aquarian man or woman of the future, their minds are going to be as pellucid as crystal, and they're going to be naturally spontaneous, altruistic. So they're going to embody both lucidity and moral firmness, and also incredible generosity, right? Those are things that are mentioned, and then we're invited to contemplate them. They're a potential portrait. Just like, you're trying to paint the abstract picture of what beings might be like based on certain considerations. Well, that seems to imply, and then it's mentioned, and this to me is very important. It's mentioned, look, the way one begins to go through the fires of cleansing and replenishment and purgation and working through the afflictions of the age that the future will inherit. The karma we're generating is going to continue to work itself out. And the new karma we're adding is also going to be part of it. So anyone who wants to become truly Aquarian isn't simply going to be Aquarian by birth, by virtue of being born in an age, or because of a certain belief system, as we understand it. Sorry. But because one is willing to go through the process of moving from being kama manasik to being buddhi manasik. That's the path. That's for anyone, the challenge. And therefore, what is the interconnection? What is the underscarnate bridge between moving from being kama manasik to being buddhi manasik? Because buddhi represents the efflorescence, the rays of the Atman, illuminating Taijasi, the manas. When the manas turns towards the Atman, it draws to it the light of the buddhi. And when it does that and starts to move away from the gravitational pull of the kama, the problems that we have been unconsciously dealing with come to the fore. And it becomes an opportunity to see within the proscenium of the mind certain tendencies, certain shallow, superficial meanings, but also certain good things, certain good tendencies, certain kind feelings, certain compassionate feelings, certain virtues that might be present. But one is going to persist. Now, what happens is, in a Socratic sense, we then begin to entertain what is the connection? Ideas. This is what Michelle was emphasizing earlier about the alienated mind. The article says the alienation of the mind is real. And we can certainly see that nowadays, for sure. The loss of meaning. You can't even connect up to certain festivals and certain observances in a culture that are morally refreshing, regenerating. Greeks could go to their plays and have something therapeutic happen. Greeks could go to their festivals and feel uplifted by somehow turning reverentially towards that, right? So, thank you. So we can understand that with that, what then do we have in America? What do we have in the modern world? Ideas. The Aquarian, it said, is concerned with knowledge, not belief, right? It's going to be knowledge, or manas has to be elevated. But what kind of knowledge? A deeper kind of knowledge. Knowledge of the self, which is an awareness, as it says in the Aquarian axioms, of the descent of the divine. And it begins with sacrifice for the whole. Who can say they know what the whole is? Well, as Joe said, can we really? No. But why is that? Why is that nebulousness still good, still inviting? Why is it still something that can be therapeutic? First of all, to say you don't know is therapeutic. Socrates was trying to get this point across again and again. People, oh, my self-image is challenged. I'm an expert on television, on NBC, I'm an expert on Fox, but God, I have to admit I don't know something. That's terribly crushing to an expert to say, I was mistaken, I was wrong, I got it wrong, I didn't know it. But you're the expert. Yes, but experts make mistakes. If we're an expert, we've made a lot of them. That's how we learn. That's how we improve. We listen to other people too. We put ourselves in their place. We go down their avenue of thought. So if ideas are the link between the lower and the higher, Socrates says you have to have a love of wisdom, of buddhi manas. Well, what do? You look at ideas, and what do? You start examining them from many points of view. Begin with what you understand. That's where an authentic beginning. What do I think love means? Begin there. Are there different forms of love? Then you begin to contemplate and sift and select, and you build a ladder. And the finer it gets, the more general it gets, the more universal it gets, the more cosmic it becomes. And therefore, you're beginning to activate the atomic in terms and moving away from the molecular. You're activating the manas. And therefore, when you engage with other people, like we do, when you consider other minds, and you listen to what they have to say, their perspective, their experience, what they've culled out of a lifetime, out of decades of thought, of listening, of study, it's amazing how you realize when you sit in isolation and you think and you contemplate, you still get trapped. You get trapped in your own naive assumptions. You get trapped in certain ways of looking at things. It isn't until you encounter other minds and hearts who are earnest that you begin to realize, wow, the marvel of the mind is that it's in everyone. It sparkles in everyone in some sense. Even from a child to someone who's cynical, there's still going to be some grain of good, some grain of insight, something you can salute the person for and help them to feel more confident, help them to feel better. What does Socrates do? Whether he was at a festival or the agora or the marketplace or in front of a temple, what could he do? He made it an instant academy of inquiry. He didn't need formal structures. Wherever Socrates was a potential academy, a moment for contemplation of ideas, looking for the universal, going beyond definitions, because definitions, while they're helpful, they define, as HPP says, they define, they bring clarity, they bring intellectual understanding. That's wonderful, but they're not necessarily deep. They're not necessarily touching profound depths. The only way you can do that is when you begin to question them. Look, as it says in the article, from many different angles. What you're doing is, in a sense, going for the center. Where is the center within any concept? Where is the germ of the archetype? And when you do that and you begin to do it, it reveals and reveals and reveals. And with it comes the energy of enthusiasm, of elan, of a kind of peak experience that you can have. Mathematicians say they experience this. I saw a mathematician once explaining how he proved Fermat's last theorem. And it took him 7-8 years to do it. And when he was explaining it to the documentarian who was filming him, as he was telling the moment that he made the discovery, finally, after 8 agonizing years of Fermat's last theorem, that he proved it, as he was explaining it, he said, what did I do? I gave up. And then just before I sent out an email saying I'd given up, I turned back to what I did in the beginning. And when I turned back, plus what I had done since then, something from what I had done since then, I brought to the beginning. And when it did, I suddenly saw the solution all at once. It unfolded like a Buddhic experience. And when he's telling this, tears start rolling down his eyes as he's explaining, this mathematician explaining it to the documentarian. He was experiencing it again. It was so profoundly moving. It made him expand in terms of his feeling of incredible joy, of discovery. There's something in eros, in every intellectual and every insight, moral of whatever kind. There's something of eros that when knowledge comes, love and expansion and elevation and purity come with it, however brief. But it's the kind of thing that it re-inspires you. In fact, he ends up saying, this particular mathematician, whose name I always forget, It's really terrible, but I forget his name. But he began, by the way, he conceived of this when he was 10 years of age. When he was 10 years of age, sitting in a library in London, he said, Fermat's last theorem, what is that? And he read it. He said, someday I'm going to solve that problem. And he was 10 years old when he began pursuing it for his master's degree. His mentor at Cambridge said, look, let me save you some trouble. Don't waste another minute trying to solve that problem. People haven't done it for 300 years. Get with your thesis. So anyway, but what does he say at the very end? He's walking in the garden and he's speaking to this cameraman. And he says, this was on Nova, by the way, years ago. And he says, he sits down, he says, well, it's like this. Fermat wrote next to an article he was writing on law, here is an equation. And this is what it yields. But I don't have time or space to tell you how I got my solution. And so that he said, people have been chasing it for 300 years. Now, I just want to let you all know as a closing thought this. It took me 220 pages of mathematics to prove Fermat's last theorem. All I can say is Fermat himself must have been highly intuitive. Yeah. See, the point is, thought is necessary to awaken Buddhi, but Buddhi also needs thought in this world to bring that luminous, precise intelligence to altruism. To doing good in this world is just not a matter of feeling good and being good. It's being wisely good. It's being intelligently good. HPB has a wonderful statement about this where she says, sacrifice, yes, that's the key. Self-sacrifice. Look at Father Damien. He's a paradigm of what a human being can do. But when I say sacrifice, remember, it should be intelligent sacrifice. Use your intelligence with whom you're interacting. And so this requires dianoia, thought, until you get to gaining clarity, and therefore you're in a position to interact in the world in such a way that it brings something uplifting.
You've got,
That was wonderful.
I see Robert Moore.
Yeah. I wondered, Michelle, if you think that meditation on the Aquarian glyph, those two wavy lines, could give us a clue about how to transcend past, present, and future.
Past, present, and future.
Yeah, talk about getting away from our conventional conception of time and space. That's part of the Aquarian ideal and the transformation of consciousness. So we've been hearing about the Aquarian, well, I mean, Jim just, in a way, talked about the interaction. It seems like that it has to do with that Aquarian glyph between the higher and lower mind. But I wondered if you had any thoughts about how it might transform our conception of past, present, and future.
Might transform. Well, in the article, he speaks about the lower line represents our lower self, and that through this devotion and purification, that the wavy line can be stretched out and gone back, and that the higher line is, they're mirrors of one another, and it's symbolized by our higher self. And it's almost like that saying twins upon a line. The higher self is lives in the eternal, and is beyond any conception of past, present, or future. That's what I have right now.
It's I think that's a very interesting question that we've all raised, Robert. And here, though, you're talking about a psychological alchemy, right? That is where you increase your sense of the timeless and of past, present, and future. Well, it seems that really is part of the dynamic of meditation, self-study, and the examination of right action. And I don't mean anything complicated by it all, just simply that when one can change the focus and of the mind and move it above the personal for a moment and put it on some divine idea, some theme, or something that is clearly transpersonal, and you do this for a short while, and you question and you look for meanings and clarification of meanings, and seeing if you can generalize it and generalize it and generalize it. And then you see how you can then understand the world, looking through the lens of this now more universal meaning of something, and look through the lens of it. You move increasingly beyond your own particular mind state. And really what one is doing is activating some element of the Manasa Rupa, some element of a deeper vesture that the voice of the silence refers to, such that you're really beginning to activate different senses that are subtler, that are mind senses, not the mind and what we call senses, but something subtler. And so what seems to happen is that in time, we end up gaining some distance from our sense of immediacy. Strangely enough, the less we're caught in the sense of immediately, the more we can act quickly in the immediate when we need to. We're not anxious ridden. Some of the early philosophers said the key is not the mind, for the mind to be free of anxiety. When the mind is free of anxiety, it is healthier physically, morally, and in every other way. So when one contemplates great themes and learns to enter into them with the kind of reverence of a child, reverential agnosticism, and enjoys that agnosticism until in time it begins to reveal meanings that help illuminate our understanding of life. Because in the end, we have to still understand life. We can't escape or run from it or just say we're going to negate everything. The purpose of meditation and self-study is so that one becomes more skillful in action. One becomes wiser, more benevolent, but a directed benevolent, an intelligent, encompassing, subtle, shaving benevolence that allows us the mind to see so many distinctions that in time you live in the present. And in one article, it mentions the fact, well, the present is also an illusion. It's closer to the divine than the past or the future. To live in the present is not easy. It's in fact very difficult. We live using our expectations. And therefore, expectations become confining and become something that is imprisonment in time. And that's why we have to renounce expectations periodically, improve them, enhance them, make them more rational, make them more integrated with others, until we get to where we're working with the law and the dynamics of harmony and cooperation. So personal expectations and the desires behind them become refined and, as Aquarian axioms say, more abstract. And we then really, even though we're, quote, incarnate, even though we're awake in waking state, we're not in the same waking state we were when we began to meditate years ago, and we began to work on understanding ourselves and other selves, not just one self. That becomes solipsistic. It becomes very much self-absorbing. We need to expand the circle of examination. All the people in your life should become part of your inner family. You should try to understand them. even though you know they're a mystery, even though you know it'll take lifetimes to understand them because you don't understand yourself yet. But nonetheless, the more we can do this, the more we can bring them within the orbit of the mind and the heart, particularly the heart. It is said that one then has a chance to gain insight. And it changes things, because then the more you get altitude and the more you have the altitude of the eternal, then acting when you have to act and having better timing comes more naturally, because it's not bound up with your personal expectations and your wants and your demands on the world. You're more detached from the world, much more detached from the world. It's called letting go. Are you familiar? I know we're getting near the end, but are you any of you familiar with the Zen Buddhist story about the two monks that were traveling on a rainy day? And it was so raining, it was so strong, it created mud everywhere and water was rushing. And they looked ahead. One was the older senior monk who was very scrupulous about observing the rules of the order of the Sangha. And the other one was a novitiate, a new monk. And he was totally awed by this elder, which he should have been. But they're walking along the road and they see ahead this young woman, and it's a muddy road, and she's trying to get across. Some water was running rapidly down the middle of it. And so when they get there, the young monk just doesn't do anything. He just wants to keep walking, but immediately the elder monk goes over and sweeps up the woman in his arms and takes her across the road and sets her down. And then he goes on. Well, one of the rules is you never touch a female, and the females don't touch males. Well, they get, finally, at the end of the day, they come to a place and they sit down, and the young monk says, I can't contain it any longer. You know the rule. You are an exemplar of rules. Why did you pick up that young woman? And the monk said, my good young man, I put that lady down hours ago. Are you still carrying her? See? It's in the mind. And he was able to integrate the noetic with the phrenic, a higher world with a lower one. And he had a sense of appropriateness. He knew when to break the rule. And the Dalai Lama says, you only learn when to break a rule when you know how to observe it. So don't tell me about your being radical and revolutionary when you never obeyed a rule that you've given yourself in your life.
Well, our time is up. I have to go to another engagement myself. Thank you very much, Michelle. Thank you very much, Jim. Very thoughtful, healing Aquarian evening. Thank you very much. And thank you all for your questions. And I think it is enigmatic. Can we not say that? This idea of what is Aquarian and this idea of Aquarian therapy. But one thing that you can say is that it is extremely hopeful, extremely affirmational of something that is very golden that we're all part of and that we can all look forward to as the Aquarian age unfolds. So thank you so much.